Welcome to Talking Sales. Today, my guest is Amber Watts. She's an enablement evangelist and a director of learning and talent for Magnet Medical, which we'll be diving deep in today, the learning and talent and development space. Amber, thank you so much for taking my invitation. I'm very excited for our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm flattered for the request. So thank you.
Sure. First, things that comes to my mind, learning and development is an area that is pretty well known. And how does it merge with sales enablement? What are some things that are changing within your expertise area, and how does sales and then enablement blend into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, I've been a variety of titles, right? Learning and development was a title that I held right when I got started in my career, but my focus has always been in sales. And I feel like a lot of times within organizations that the support for sellers does fall under the learning and development function. Enablement is kind of a newer term out there, but when you look back, like, gosh, that is what I was doing all along. I was helping drive performance. I was helping sellers be better at their jobs through coaching, through instructional design, whether that's formal training or creating informal training experiences through them, creating a mentor program around it. There's so many different facets, but what's unique about the enablement function is all the different players that are involved. So when I moved away from more of the traditional L&D to truly sales enablement, what I found is I had to have partnerships with all different departments across the org that I didn't have to necessarily in the past, right? What I mean by that is in the enablement role, I've had to partner with marketing. I've had to partner with product marketing, operations, obviously big one, right? We need to be joined at the hip so much that we know what each other ate for breakfast and lunch that day. You have to be partnered with your CRO. You have to understand their vision. I've fallen under product marketing before. I've fallen directly under a CRO in a couple cases as well. Each organization is still kind of figuring out what enablement means to them. And it's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's what I think is so unique about enablement, and what also is really hard, because you have to go explain what you do to everyone you interact with, even internally.
I completely agree that companies are still trying to figure it out. And if you could tell me, because when I look at learning development, traditionally this was a training on site once a year, 6 months that people were coming in. And right now, when I look at the technology that is available, this area completely shifted. What are some things that you feel like the modern learning and development area, like boosted by technology, and this approach that sales enablement is giving, is like, how is it changing? What are some things that you feel are the trends that are influencing your area right now?
Yes. So, oh my gosh, there's a lot of things that are influencing it, right? And I sometimes feel like we start to fall into the flavor of the month a bit as well. So what I mean by that is each company needs to have a focus on their learning tech ecosystem. So when I was in a past role as a consultant, that is one thing I helped companies with, is not only how do you use our software, but how does it interact with, and how should it interact with all of the other pieces. So traditionally a sales org or an L&D team as well, there's going to be a lot of different pieces of software that support the seller's day-to-day. You're going to see a CRM in every organization, right? So like your Salesforce, your Bullhorn, HubSpot. You're going to see an LMS that could be 100 different LMSs. There's so many out there. Heck, there's LXPs as well. You've got your CMS, which are going to be like your high spots, your seismic, where content lives. To maybe it's more collateral based, but I see companies use that as an LMS too. You're going to have a conversation intelligence tool. You're going to have a prospecting tool like Outreach or SalesLoft. And you have to get all of these things to talk. But I think what's the hardest part is sellers don't necessarily want to have to use all these things. And we didn't even talk about communication tools, right? Between email and Slack and Teams, there's so many different components. And then you've got L&D who has to have their own tools to empower all of the sellers. So the sellers may not see any of those tools, but you still have to help them through the use of them, right? So maybe even like project management tools. The complexity of the tech stack is the worst that I've ever seen right now. But I think companies are also starting to almost eliminate some of them and trying to simplify their tech stack, whether it's due to budget reasons or unfortunately, the team that managed it is no longer there. So now they're paying for this tool that they aren't using. But again, the hardest part is getting them into it and getting them to use it the way that you intended. Some of the things that I would see is just resistance, apprehension of, why do I have to use this? Is it really making my life easier? If we focus on just like the main ones, right? If we're able to build formal and informal trainings, we don't always need a tool to do that. Tools are great because we can track, we can assign, but at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that people can do their job and they can do it well. And there's little friction in the process. So if we can meet them in the flow of work, whether that's with or without a technology, that's a win, right? Technology is not always the answer, is kind of what I mean by that.
Yeah, definitely. So what I hear you say is that enabling the seamless experience, that the training itself is immersive, is like valuable for also hybrid workers and remote workers, right? So that can technology cover. But then when you design a like learning and development program, you have to make sure that it's like given at time to special skills and like things that need to be developed on a given time. So like more real time, like for what I'm hearing, right? Like the process needs to be seamless and it needs to be right, like honing the needs that are very current, not something that is, like not that close to my heart and to my job in order for it to be successful, right?
Yep.
And if you could tell me, what are some modern metrics when you look at your area? What are some metrics of success? How do you try to measure if you're doing a good job as a learning and development expert?
Well, again, if I'm supporting the sales org, this is why I love sales enablement, because I really can put a number to what I'm doing. Now, I don't have direct impact on sellers hitting their quotas, right? But I do have a dotted line to it. So I like to be able to say, okay, here's a pre-assessment. I use the tools that I have in place or manager feedback or seller feedback to start to identify what I call gap trainings, because there's a whole pool of employees that have already been onboarded that are trying to do their job today and they want to be better at it, or maybe they're falling behind because of economic times, right? So I'm going to look at, or through the use of my tools, identify some gap trainings. And then sometimes training's not always the answer, which we'll come back to that later, but I'm going to take a look at, okay, what is current state? And KPIs are the perfect way to do that. Performance metrics. So how many reps are currently hitting quota? And then there's this additional piece of how many reps are currently hitting the average productivity. So like as a whole sales org, what is the average? And then how many people are hitting that? Because quotas are one thing, and sometimes I feel like companies have to adjust those. So me just focusing just on that, I can try to design training around it, but I'm more worried about the current state. What is the average as a whole org? And then helping improve that, of how many people are up to that piece, before I'm worried about going beyond that, right? Like meeting them where they are, meeting the organization where they are. So I'm looking at those things. I don't always believe in pass-fail assessments. So I think pass-fail is perfect when you're going through onboarding or that initial job training. But beyond that, it's more focused on practice in order to obtain mastery. And mastery takes years, it takes time. And in this environment, you alluded to it earlier, right? It's the more of that real world application. And I assess people in that practice environment because I need to ensure, can they do it? Will they do it? And then will they do it well? And so that's the approach that I take, especially from a metric standpoint. Some of them can be very obvious, but for me, it's more of, let's start where we're at today before I'm worried about all the way over here.
Yeah, and from what you're saying, like when you take a look at the metrics that used to be valuable, so how good was the training? How did you like the lunch? How did you like the trainer, right? Because these were the basic data that we had years ago. Right now, for technology and all those processes and what you were mentioning earlier, you have so much more and so much accurate like set of data that you can measure to actually like make your area more productive in providing help, right, to the salespeople. That's really exciting. And what are some challenges that you see companies face when implementing sales enablement in L&D area? And how they can try to overcome them, like the traps that they should should avoid.
Yeah. So when it comes to challenges, so that's definitely going to vary at each company, right? I've been the first enablement hire at many of my employers. And my challenges were never around getting buy-in because, well, let's face it, I was there because they felt like they needed more structure around seller development, or onboarding is a big one. But instead, it was always on gaining agreement on what should or shouldn't be training. A skill gap isn't always going to require a formal training, right? It might just be a resource that I need to create. But when we're trying to launch an enablement program, it's hard because we don't want to turn away a request for training, because after all, we're in enablement because we love to develop people and we love to drive performance. So I think that the biggest challenge is just slowing down, stopping, doing ourselves a favor of conducting a needs analysis first. Again, could you create a resource? Could you send a short Loom video? And really what I love to do and what I find the most effective is, can I take the time to enable the managers to enhance their one-on-ones, their coaching with their employees to drive this desired behavior? And so that's the biggest challenges I've seen personally firsthand, is just, focusing on that needs analysis portion.
Yeah, that's really interesting from what you said in terms of influencing the managers, that they can have better one-on-ones. I believe that's a huge impact that can be overlooked, because when you look at, okay, what training do we have to see? What budget do we have? Like what resources? Then like you have to implement those and make those a change, right? So managers, I believe, is a great option that you just mentioned that is crazy important into having the change within your organizations, right? And
Definitely.
you mentioned you were the first hire in enablement in many of your organizations. What were some successes that you've seen in companies that have actually stay focused enough and resistant enough to implement this function?
Well, there are two things that I would recommend doing right away. Number one is you want to meet with every single people leader to understand their concerns, their challenges, also what their hiring persona is, and then what they're most proud of on their team. You can pull performance data, right? But that's only part of the story. So I want to know what makes their team successful and why, and then where their team falls short and why. And then the second part of that, and I can't stress this enough, I didn't do it in my earlier years. And when I did, I saw a big difference, which was I established a charter when I got started. So after I went through and I interviewed and met with every single one of those people leaders, I sat down and said, okay, here's what enablement means to this organization. Who is involved in that as well? What outcomes am I going to deliver for them, or would I like to deliver and get their buy-in on? And then it looks so different at each organization. And a lot of that just has to do with what teams are already in place and how they support the sellers today. So for example, again, I was in a product marketing role, but I conducted all the new sales hires training when they first started, because there really wasn't a formal L&D function yet. My charter there looked drastically different than my charter at an organization that did have an L&D team already in place. Make the charter. This will help your stakeholders and your sellers all understand what you can do for them and how you are going to make their lives at work easier. And from there, you let your charter evolve with your organization.
Yeah, I believe that's a very good advice to follow. If you could tell me, because I believe that there's also one thing that companies can fall into, like when the business strategy that might be really dynamic right now, we see the economics that are happening. Companies will have to switch strategies. So how to ensure that the business strategy is aligned with sales enablement efforts and L&D like efforts that you have on your company? Because sometimes they can be lagging, and then it doesn't support the business goals. And I believe that's a waste of great effort, energy, and resources. Do you have any solution or ideas how to overcome that?
Oh my gosh, yes. Absolutely. You have to have a sales playbook, right? Many companies are going to have more than one, but your playbook, think of it as like your secret sauce for your organization. And every playbook should have 4 main focus areas. Number one is going to be your people. as a focus area. So this is going to include what their KPIs are, maybe like day-to-day behaviors, the day-to-day workload, account planning, territory planning. And then there's 4 parts to it. And the second part is going to be your processes, so like your deal stages, exit and entry criteria that are involved in those, any activities. This could be your lead gen cadences, and then the different personas that you have and how you handle those. And then you're going to have the third piece, which is your product, or in this case with my current company, it's a service, right? This is where you're going to include case studies, maybe some demo best practices, or what I like to call demo crimes. Product and service overviews are in there. And then the last part is that technology piece. So this is where you say, this is our tech stack. Here's the overview of our tech stack here. And then include SOPs around each one of those pieces of technology as well. The idea with the playbook, and why I feel like they're so important, is that it just keeps everybody rowing in the same direction, and it keeps everyone on the same page. And the managers know what to coach to. Enablement is an agreement. And at the end of the day, it just eliminates the confusion. Like, this is what we believe works, and this is why, and this is how we do business here.
So one closing question: if what is like the way, the model, the type, the framework that you feel is most efficient right now in terms of delivering new knowledge to overworked and crazy busy salespeople?
So help me understand that question a little bit better. So what framework?
How do you structure the training sessions, or basically the development plan for the salespeople that are always lacking time, are always busy, or like calling the customers?
Yeah.
How do you create those programs for them to be manageable so that they can actually gain the knowledge that you need them to grow?
Yes. So I've been fortunate to work in organizations where learning was really supported. And then I've been in organizations where I've had sellers say, can we just limit everything to one 30-minute meeting a month? I'm like, okay, we got to meet somewhere in between, right? So for me, what I like to do, especially with the tenured reps, onboarding is its own thing. And I could have like 2-hour session just on onboarding alone. But if we're looking at just the tenured reps, I think pre-assessments are huge. So what a pre-assessment is going to tell me is, yes, your numbers say this, but now I know specifically maybe for this team or this role or maybe this individual where they lack. Or, you know what, this training isn't applicable to them, right? Because they have tested out of this. And so for those individuals, I may suggest a different path, a different course. I'm real big on internal podcasts. Like, how can I make it easier for them to consume the information for someone I feel is maybe already ahead, right? Everyone else, the training is required for that individual or individuals or team. It might be more optional. But if we don't do the pre-assessments, I don't think we're giving our adult learners enough credit. And that's when you get that disengagement from them as well, of like, I don't feel like I need to be here. Well, this pre-assessment that you took, that may be accurate, or it may say, nope, you do need to be here, and then helping them understand, well, what's in it for me, right? Why am I doing this? But from there, yes, I mean, I could go 100 different ways with this, but I believe in the social aspect too. So when I create a mentor program within an organization, I like to take them from mentors to coaches, because coaches are people who are going to meet you where you are and help you hone in on your skills. Whereas a mentor is there to say, hey, here's all the mistakes I made, and sharing experiences. It's not much of a coach, right? So if I can have those individuals in place, and I can have that complement and support the training that I'm creating or the programs I'm creating, it actually takes a lot of work off my plate, because I have to do less reinforcement, because it's happening more organically because of those relationships that are already in place. So if you take the time to have something like that type of infrastructure, you spend way less time designing coursework, designing assessments and evaluations, because people are performing and getting the support they need to perform.
That's amazing. That's really, really something that I believe people can take and apply into their companies. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. If people are more interested into getting to know you and how you work, and probably if they have some questions, where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn. So it's at AM Watts, is the unique URL at the end of the LinkedIn.com URL. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I do post quite often just about what I'm seeing in enablement. And I like to share, I'm well connected with a lot of the enablement professionals where I share their thinking as well of, hey, this is an interesting take. And yeah, I like to curate information for everyone so you don't have to go search for it.
Great, and that's my best recommendation that I can tell you. Go follow Amber because she'll curate all the things that you need to know, and you'll stay on top of trends. So thanks again for our conversation. I'm really looking forward to staying connected to you.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for having me.